Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Conversations with Lieutenant Governor series. We are very fortunate today to be joined by two state leaders who show every day their dedication to education and to their states to make sure that they're building up a system that helps improve equitable outcomes in the long term and the near term. Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hall Long of Delaware and Lieutenant Governor Billy Nungesser of Louisiana, thank you so much for joining us both of you today. Before we get started, I do want to share a few logistical notes. We do have a couple of ways for you to join the conversation. We appreciate those of you who have submitted questions in advance, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can. We've also built in time for Q&A there at the end. You have a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, so feel free to chat in any questions you have. We will be keeping everybody muted, but please feel free to chat in, and we will try to get to all your questions. We also welcome you to tweet throughout the conversation. If you do so, please use the hashtag LTGovConvo, and we will try to make sure that we also get back to any questions you have on there. Finally, before we get started, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Javed Siddiqui, the Hunt Institute's President and CEO, to open up the webinar. Over to you, Javed.
Thanks, Patrick, and thanks to everybody joining us today. And special thanks to Lieutenant Governor Hall Long and Lieutenant Governor Nungesser for taking time to share their insights. I know how busy you are during this really unprecedented time we are in as individual states and certainly the country. So thanks for making time to be with us and all of our guests. The Hunt Institute has been fortunate enough to build relationships like these with a number of state leaders all over the country. From our Hunt Kane Leadership Fellows that Governor Hall Long has been a participant in and continues to help us recruit other lieutenant governors and other state electeds all over the country. So thanks for your support in that endeavor. Through this work, we've gotten a real strong insight into the work of lieutenant governors, the work across so many sectors: education, economy, justice, health, and what an important impact you all have on the health and well-being of education of your children in your home states. So both of today's panelists, obviously it goes without saying, are dedicated to improving the opportunity and education in their states, and we're excited for them to hear from them today and for them to hear from each other and field questions from our guests from all over the country. So joining us, we have superintendents, legislators, other folks from governor's offices, hosts of teachers and principals from all over the country. But rest assured, Delaware and Louisiana educators are representing both of our respective host states. So thanks for helping drive the attendance. Turned out to be a really great audience for you this afternoon. One thing I want to quickly say about the Institute and our efforts: we have shifted a lot of our work due to COVID-19 to support groups such as the ones I've mentioned, teachers and school leaders and district leaders. No matter what role you serve in currently, we at the Hunt Institute are prepared to support you in whatever way we can. So if there's anything we can do to support you in making equitable and meaningful decisions for students education, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. We're here to support you. So with that, I'll kick it back over to Patrick to begin our conversation with our two dynamic speakers. Patrick.
Great, thanks so much, Javed. And so I am Patrick Sims, Director of Policy and Research with the Hunt Institute. And Javed, I think that's an especially good point here. We've got two key leaders in their states who work across so many different sectors and help really guide state policy across education, workforce, tourism, et cetera. So Lieutenant Governor Hall Long, I'm going to start with you. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about your role in Delaware's response to COVID-19, and especially as it relates to education.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to Dr. Siddiqui. It is great, as you mentioned, to participate with the Hunt Institute, and I am thrilled to have my colleague from the NLGA, our chair, Billy Nungesser, coming in to us from Louisiana. And it goes to show when it comes to our children and healthcare and COVID, there is no party politics. Today we are here truly with the Hunt Institute to really come together and brainstorm and learn from each other. So I look forward to the dialogue. I am thrilled that I've been through the Hunt Keen Fellowship, and today I just want to start with just 3 or 4 sync comments so that you can get into the questions. I want to start by first acknowledging any of us in elected office are only as good as those around us. And so I want to thank our Deputy Secretary, Christine Altos, and John Sheehan from the governor's office, and Tanner Pulse, who's in my office, who've helped us today as we formulated thoughts for this great webinar. And to all my friends out there, both in Delaware, in Louisiana, and across the country, to do the best work with our most important commodity, our children, our teachers, our superintendents, our teachers unions, our frontline workers, our nurses and counselors. Nothing more important. So in Delaware, to get to your response, I'll be very brief. Our governor, like all governors, are learning kind of as we go. We're kind of building the road, right, to this pandemic and coming up with responses. Education in our state, and as you'll hear hopefully in the dialogue later, were some of the first individuals, educators, to really come up with a plan and a response, and they're continuing to do so. In Delaware, we have something called the Pandemic Resurgence Advisory Committee. Our governor created recently with an executive order. I'm pleased with our Secretary of State to be chairing that, and we're looking at health, business, and equity. And all of those three factors incorporate our children and our educators, both secondary education and higher ed. So important. The other component is, you'll hear me later if I have the opportunity to answer a little more detail about a school reopening work group committee that is being led by both superintendents and Department of Ed leaders and stakeholders and nurses, counselors, elected officials who are working really hard on three major bucket areas: the logistics of operations and service, the other component near and dear to my heart as a university professor of nursing, which is health and wellness, and also the other component that is so critical now, and I know it is for Billy down in Louisiana, which is the academic piece with equity. How are we addressing the equity in this new mode of distance learning? Because we were all thrown into this new modality and response. And the final thing I have to say is about the issues that we hear a lot about adults. We're worried about adults with isolation. It's really about our kids and their emotional well-being too. And so in Delaware, I've been pleased to lead initiatives around behavioral health, and also working hard with our First Lady and other leaders in our state on trauma, and a couple of our great cabinet secretaries as well, looking at trauma-informed care and ACEs in our children. So I could go on forever, but I will stop there and just say welcome. Thank you for having us. I really hope that you all can learn some things we're doing in Delaware. And honestly, I'm doing this because I want to learn in our state some lessons from everyone else here today. So thank you, Patrick.
Thank you so much. Governor Nungesser, I'll turn over to you if you could share a little bit about your role in Louisiana's response. Oh, Governor, sorry, I think we have you on mute.
How are we now?
Perfect, thank you.
Right. It's an honor to be with you today, Governor, and I too want to thank all the educators on the call today for their commitment. My role as Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Louisiana, my main role is tourism. The good news is we've had 4 record-breaking years. Last year, 53.2 million visitors visited Little Louisiana, and they left behind 1.9 billion in taxes that Louisianans didn't have to pay. That's a little over $1,100 per Louisiana family. Over 250,000 jobs in the hospitality industry. I'm also over the state parks, state museums, historical preservation, the libraries in the state, Volunteer Louisiana, and the Atchafalaya Basin. We have a unique situation in Louisiana. We run separately. I'm a Republican, and I work very closely with our Democrat governor. And through all these disasters that we've seen in Louisiana, we sit side by side. The good news is we're very good at disasters. The difference here is we've been through first as a parish president, Katrina, 7 hurricanes, the oil spill, a flood in 2016 that flooded 57 of our 64 parishes here in Louisiana. But after each of those disasters, the outreach from across the country has been unbelievable in supporting Louisiana. Here, everyone is dealing with the same crisis. So the tourism and the economic recovery is going to be great for all of us. The good news is in the travel industry, we saw the largest increase over the Memorial Day weekend. We actually had our best weekend ever in our state parks, over 20,000 people visiting our state parks. So we're seeing an increase in people wanting to get out and do the outdoors thing around. 82% of Americans say their vacation this summer is going to be by car or RV. They're not getting on a cruise ship. So we're going to be targeting those markets as we look to rebuild Louisiana. We also offer a little Louisiana lanyard. If you book your convention or conference here later this year, next year, we'll give you great Louisiana seafood. We'll pay for a local band or musician, so the first night's on us. We've had great success at getting a lot of conference and conventions, not having to endure that first night of expense, and it's working well for us. Through this shutdown, the challenges in education, as they are for everyone, are great. Of getting back the schools and colleges open, allowing some of the kids to stay and learn from home. The challenge here is going to be funding as well. Louisiana has 12 colleges. Over many governors, past and present, there's been talk about the consolidation of those colleges, and it becomes a political football. So as we go forward, and we're going to be challenged with the state budget in Louisiana, as every state will be, it'll be interesting to see how the higher education deals with that, as well as the education as a whole. We're going to see a challenge as we've had internet services very difficult in some of the areas in the state. My office provides $1 million of tourism money to the library systems in the state because of budget cuts to make sure they can provide internet service to every library in the state. In many communities, that's the only internet service that those children have. They get to go to that local library to learn. So that's a challenge, as it is in a lot of remote communities. I would mention one thing. When Louisiana passed the lottery, we were going to make our education the best in the country. Unfortunately, there was a little part of the bill that allowed the legislators to take that lottery, the education money, and just fill the hole with the lottery money as it came in. So education never got any better. We had an effort to fund some individual scratch off of special needs children and hopefully get back to where that lottery money can be used for teachers' pay raises, improving education. But that's something that will obviously be talked about in the next legislative session. The governor yesterday here in Louisiana announced that we will stay in phase 2 for the next 30 days, which is going to be very difficult for many small businesses and restaurants operating at that minimum seating capacity. Many of them had hoped we'd be rolling into phase 3, but Louisiana is one of those states that's seen a high increase in cases. You know, as I mentioned before, we usually rebound very well after disaster, but in this particular case, we don't see light at the end of the tunnel. It gets a little better. We have a setback, and as we know, many of these small businesses that our states depend on may not make it through this phase 2 and phase 3, and ultimately open the doors back up. So with that, look forward to taking any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Governor Nungesser. It's really helpful too as we think about the push and pull with both the need to help businesses survive right now and the need to raise funds, knowing that we're going into a recession that's going to challenge budgets for education. So that's a helpful way to frame it. Thank you. Governor Hull, I'm going to come back to you, and you referenced a little bit about health in particular, and of course you yourself are a health expert. What is it that the Delaware is doing for students' health and learning right now, especially in the time of social distancing?
You know, it's so important, you know, as a public health nurse and faculty in research and epidemiology, it really is based upon science and what is best in our state. And thank goodness in our public school sector, which includes public schools, charter schools, and others, we've really had our stakeholders, our leaders, really looking at the science and around health. Like all of us in the country, our Governor Carney, just like Billy's governor down in Louisiana, you know, have really been looking to our public health experts. And so fortunately in our state, I don't know if they did this in Louisiana, but perhaps in other states. And if you hadn't, as we prepare for the fall and winter, which will be very dark, if we don't get individuals wearing masks and socially distancing and really thinking through, working that framework, because that's what today is about, right? Having a framework in place for minimum return, ideally, miraculously, if we had a vaccine or treatment, no return of COVID, minimum return, moderate return, and or substantial. That's how Delaware at least is looking at that. And for the health piece, to get right to your question, there are several things Delaware has looked at, and I think other states have probably done a little different twist to this. We have looked at making sure children continue to be not hungry. A hungry child can't learn. I felt like I was going down to Louisiana there with Billy for a minute. If you talk about food, if you ever spend time with Billy, he talks about, you know, taking care of the underserved and equitable care. Delaware is so proud. We're a small state. We don't have all the parishes that you have in Louisiana and the large counties, but we represent the country and our demography when it comes to both race and population of need. And we have been able to partner with National Guard and others to ensure that services and food were delivered, over 2.5 million lunches, which is a lot for our Delaware student population. And Christine and John, who I know are listening in from Delaware, you know, if there are specific questions, can give you more information. Delaware also took from our Division of Public Health and assigned staff to partner and be specifically earmarked for the Department of Education, whether it be early learning and childcare, all the way through working on issues with our children with 504 and IEPs. Let me tell you, my school nurse friends who are listening will tell you they didn't sit around over summer and take a break during this period of time since March 17th. They have really made it a point to work with students, to outreach, to make sure their health is okay, to make sure that they're getting services. We know all states across the country have had a decrease in their report of child abuse. That doesn't mean it's stopped. It means that the school teacher, the counselors aren't there. And so we're making sure counselors and others are available. So healthcare hasn't stopped. You know, we're making sure there are services. I'm very proud in Delaware that we have telehealth services. And one of our working groups is led by a psychologist. So again, making sure mental health, physical health, services being there and being prepared, having telehealth. And we'll get to that later because there is some issues around broadband and, you know, connectivity. The big thing I know that folks would really want me to mention is in our state, because we are small, we have been able to, with our Office of the Governor, with our Department of Ed, and our local education associations, including unions and all levels of stakeholders, they have met and communicated weekly, and also with HR, our Office of Management and Budget, to make sure that 90% of those care funds are being spent appropriately, making sure they're going to where health needs are, or technology and devices are also needed. And I'll get into that more later. So again, because we are small, we've been able to have hundreds of meetings and lots of us on Zoom. So that's all I'll say for now. I'll stop so you can get to hear from Billy's side. And I know you've got a few more questions.
Thank you so much. And so Governor Nungesser, please feel free to respond to that if you'd like, especially around the health. But I'd also like to ask you about some of the challenges, especially for rural students. You know, Louisiana is a very diverse state and does have some quite rural areas. What are you all doing to help rural students and thinking about connectivity and those kinds of issues? Sorry.
There we go. Through the shutdown, one of the real struggles has been these kids rely on the meals in these poor communities at school. So the communities have taken upon themselves to work with local restaurants to provide where parents would drive up and pick up those meals to feed those kids. They also had set up, we have a thing called Uniquely Louisiana, which we developed through the library system, which you download at home, that educates kids about things all over Louisiana. It's kind of a fun educational program. We saw the use of that up 400% through the homework at home. We also have developed Homework Louisiana through the library system. And this is an online, real-time teachers offering tutoring to students. You can go on there and search for a job. You can also go on there and help prepare a resume. So it's multi-task and there's real lifetime teachers donating their time where if you're behind in class, you can go on, ask any questions. They can even work with you on some lessons through the computer. So that homework network has exploded, and we've ramped up and added more tools to that toolbox to make sure that's available. And it's really been used a lot by our rural communities, because in some of the larger communities where they have gotten together in smaller groups for tutoring and those things, they haven't been able to do that in the rural communities.
Thank you so much. And Governor Long, I think you wanted to respond to that as well around connectivity and broadband, as well as technological access.
I do. And the one thing, I don't know how I failed to mention this. I know I started with it when I was talking about healthcare, when we are doing the meals. I'm sure Billy's doing the same. You know, making sure we have those other services and items, right? Our PPE, making sure children who are over a certain age, we don't want to put them on 2 years and younger, but have their face coverings and those kind of things. So again, every touch point where we can touch a family, we can touch a child, we make sure we're not just handing them food, but we're also giving them those other important resources, which means devices too. Early on, I have to give a shout out to Delaware's technical TTI and DDOE and individual school districts. Believe it or not, Billy, you've got lots of parishes. We have a small state, but we have 19 public school districts, which is a lot, right, for some. And so each of them kind of carve out their own niche with their local education association and making sure students get the technology. We also have issues with connectivity and broadband and, you know, certainly using some of the CARES funds to make sure these children do have access to certain services, because it is a challenge. Both for those who live in English as second language. We have a number of children whose parents are also emotionally suffering from substance use disorder and other mental health challenges. So we really have to make sure that the IT connections are present. The other thing I want to mention too is kind of unique, but I noticed with some of the listeners that you have here online, many of them are into STEM and technologies, the STEM work in their states. And I have to say, to those who were light years ahead, to the entrepreneurs, and I know the Hunt Institute has valued technology in the classroom and having resources, thank goodness. Thank goodness we had some of those entrepreneurs in STEM who had the foresight to think about this. They didn't know they were doing it for a pandemic. Just like when we passed telehealth legislation in many states, we did not realize how important that distance telehealth or the STEM work would be. So again, kudos to those faculty who've learned how to integrate technology. Now we just have to take it to the next level, how we're going to be using that technology to correspond, to text with, to communicate with high-risk children. In Delaware, the final technology piece I'll say is that our Department of Substance Abuse and Mental Health does have a system set up for parents or teens who need a little help emotionally. We have a DE Hope line that they can call or text as well. So from a technology perspective, taking it to the health side. So that's all I have to add for that point.
Great, thank you so much, Governor. So a question for both of you is really just thinking about preparing for the next school year and how to prepare for fall 2020 when, to your point, Governor Nungesser, things are changing rapidly and where you hope to be transitioning to the next phase soon, you unfortunately have to pause a little bit. So what are some of the things that you're all thinking about and how might the fall semester look a little different? Governor Nungesser, I'll come to you first.
Right.
Good.
I'm on good. Well, first thing we've got to do is we've got to do a better job of getting people to wear the mask out in public, keep a distance, and take the safe practices to get us from phase 2 to phase 3. And that seems to be the largest challenge amongst youngsters. And so, you know, we're enlisting people like Lauren Daigle, who is a famous singer here from Louisiana, and Lane Hardy, those kind of young celebrities to do some public information, you know, to try to get younger people to wear the mask. And that's why we're asking all elected officials to do it too, but it's a struggle. We've got legislators that aren't doing it, and it kind of trickled down effect. And because if we continue to have these setbacks, you won't be able to get kids back in school safely. But we do see, and the superintendent here in Louisiana just announced he's going to count on each school district to put together their own plan. Because as you mentioned, some of the remote areas and some of our parishes, the poorer parishes, smaller parishes, don't have the same elevated numbers as some of the bigger cities. So they may feel more comfortable with the majority of the kids getting back in the classroom safely, where you'll, in larger parishes, which is a county in most cities, most states, you will have the option to do both, where you can let your kids, if you don't feel comfortable, send them back to school, learn via the internet, and that way the kids in the classroom will be able to spread out. They also have put together, the same thing we're doing with restaurants and shops, multiple cleaning dailies, and all of those things that will make the campuses safe for those kids. And they've empowered each school district to come up with their own set of rules, taking the guidelines from the governor's plan to make sure they can do that safely.
Thank you. Governor Hollong?
Yes, let me build off of what Billy had indicated. So not to be repetitive, so you can get to some chat questions. Again, as Billy indicated, really letting the science and the numbers kind of direct us, the pandemic resurgence group, but also our education group, talking too much on Zoom, our education groups, to make sure that that we are in these partnerships, which we've been. Delaware's been able to do that as we've provided meals to students and we've looked at internet connectivity. We've really worked to partner. The issue is with our work group, which will be giving a report to our Secretary of Education. So again, they have a separate work group that's looking at operations and services, health and wellness, academics, and equity issues. So making sure they take that report, and then ideally, since we have had the partners and the superintendents involved, they will take these and hit the ground running based upon the data. If there are no cases of COVID, which we all know is very unlikely unless we have a vaccine or treatment, we are most likely going to be faced with a resurgence. And all along, having a platform in place, whether we need to stagger classrooms, whether we end up doing totally online again, if it is substantial, or what measures are in place. And as Billy indicated, having the cleaning, the protocols, the PPE, the hand sanitizer, thinking of little things, busing, right? You know how energized children are. Are they going to sit quietly next to each other on a bus? What is the spacing? What are those kinds of issues? Also working with professional learning opportunities, because as the Hunt Institute is about teaching and teachers and resources, what is good for the teacher? Because it's very stressful, right, for the new teacher who maybe hasn't taught online. I know I have 30 years in higher ed and have taught online, but as I watch colleagues who haven't, what are those resources also for them? And really making sure that we are using our care dollars wisely and role modeling, like Billy said. I'm boots on the ground. I go out as the undercover lieutenant governor often, covered in full PPE, helping with screenings. It's frustrating when I see young guys, girls out on the streets playing basketball, sweating, touching each other, going down to the beach, not putting on face coverings. I mean, all of that, the more we can educate. And kudos to Billy. Billy, I need some New Orleans entertainment sent up here. If you want to help me with some videos or something, we could use that, but we really do have to. And I think that goes to equity and cultural competency. Students and faculty who look like their community, they're going to respond to that community better. And so I think those cultural sensitivity and competency measures are really important too during a pandemic.
Thank you, Governor. So I wanted to follow up a little bit more specifically, and I'll come back to you, Governor Hollong, and then we'll come over to Governor Nungesser. But I'm wondering, as you think about it from an equity perspective, as you just mentioned, and we do have issues of lack of technology, more challenging or less ability to educate while at home during a pandemic like this, and we think about that return. Are there any other kind of more specific policies and or programs that you all have already developed or in the process of developing to help close those equity gaps? And so Governor Hollong, I'll come to you first.
couldn't tell if Billy was going or not, the hand. And again, I can defer even to Christine and John, who are out in your listening audience, if they want to chime in. Having a workforce that looks like it was very important, like the students can connect to. We in Delaware have been trying really hard to do that, but that's a long-term, issue. When it comes to equity, I have to emphasize again, because as an academician, I often have colleagues in healthcare and nursing who think equal is equitable. It is not. And so really having to make sure as states are designing healthcare programs in our schools, of course I went right to healthcare in schools, but making sure that in our schools we have equity, making sure, I can tell you when I go around as that undercover lieutenant governor going door to door at shelters, at hotels, and I find a room with 5 children in it, that is not equity, even though they have a device that maybe was provided. And so I know our state is working hard with social work, and that's why DPH assigned a person on COVID to the Department of Ed. And I know I'm missing some other great things. I know that our Department of Ed, working with the community and stakeholders, has this whole committee, and they're comprised of individuals who live this, who know it. So our Urban League is actively involved, one of our major leaders, and that leader also is on the governor's pandemic committee. So we're making sure educators are looped into all levels of government to make sure that we have housing and transportation and equitable opportunity for these children so they're not hungry and that they are able to have support. Because we know when they go home, they don't always have support and they are couch surfing often. So we have to make sure there's those equitable factors. And the last thing I'll say is our governor does have a Family Services Cabinet Council. I would encourage those listening from other states to look at having their governor or their Department of Ed look at partnering with other cabinet agencies where there are gaps in systems between your youth, your perhaps high-risk populations, as well as Ed. So think about that to your other states.
Thank you. Governor Nungesser?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is we've seen a challenge with kids having access to computers. I know in Texas, the lieutenant governor there, Apple provided laptops to all the students for a small fee to get all the kids that needed a laptop in a pretty big state. We have turned that information over to our superintendent of education to try to work with Apple to see if Louisiana could take advantage of that as well. But that, along with the having access to the internet in those smaller communities, there's been several focus groups put together by the governor, and I'm not directly over the education, but I know many of those focus groups are dealing with individual problems as they differ from North Louisiana in those rural communities as they do down in South Louisiana where it's more populated areas. And I don't really have any feedback from those groups as of yet, but I know they are working with parents, educators on solutions and trying to tackle some of those immediate problems.
Great. Excuse me, that's helpful. And that public input is critical to making sure we do move things equitably. So great to hear. So I'm going to come back to you, Governor Holong, and it's something that Governor Nungesser already touched on, but as we think about going into the fall and beyond and the financial challenges that are going to be facing schools and universities and community colleges, what are some of the things that you're thinking about in order to make sure that we hold up our institutions and have the financial resources necessary for them to be able to serve all children well?
Very appropriate question, because when I finish here this afternoon, I preside in my role of Lieutenant Governor over the Senate. And we're actually working all 3 of our budget bills if things go as planned today. One of which is the infrastructure, the capital funding. The other are the operational funds, which will include our public institutions. Billy mentioned, he had 13. We, have more like 3 public systems in our state. One is public-private land grant institution. Funding's important. I should go back a second to say Governor Carney a couple years ago had education opportunity funding, which was earmarked $28 million in Delaware to go high-risk schools, which often are students with poverty, Title I schools, and very focused on English as second learner language too. So we've got that pot of money, and we've worked really hard in Delaware. I'm knocking on wood. We know next year will be tough. We have a AAA bond rating. We are hopefully passing our budget this year without cuts to any pay. We are absolutely not laying folks off, and we have enough money for all the referendums that Delaware passed for new school construction. People come to Delaware because we have a low overall property tax. You know, it's a great destination. It's a location, although Billy will differ with me. He's going to give y'all incentives to do conferences there. I heard him in the beginning. But it's so important, and our corporate community, because we do incorporate most of the LLCs in this country, are great partners as well. And so for us, having the resources and funding is critical. I'm thinking of Governor Hunt in his conversations when he was in North Carolina, and the stories that he shared with me when I was a Hunt King Fellow, you know, talking about, you want to know the future of a state, you really look at how education is funded, and you want to know what's important, you look at a governor's budget. And I know for us, education remains the #1 item in our budget, followed by healthcare. And yes, we may not be able to do all the fancy programs, but we're making sure that children have the resources, that we will have the testing. Our higher ed institutions are building upon collaborative measures of not raising tuition. They're working really, really hard on looking about their keeping online and testing. So we are doing everything we can to hold on this year and hope for the best as we go into next year from an economic perspective. And I can go into more detail later, but I can see Billy's chomping to answer this from Louisiana.
So, you know, we have a real challenge because tourism was our 4th biggest industry. I mentioned those tax dollars, but also oil and gas has been such a big part of our budget. And we were just coming out of a severe budget problem when this new governor took office. They had passed some tax increases, but it still wasn't to fill the backlog of infrastructure needs for the universities. Earlier, I mentioned the talks that go on every 3 or 4 years about merging some of the universities because we have 12, and literally in New Orleans have 2 universities right across the street from each other. So maybe in this tough budget times, those talks resume and some resolution, because it's really hard to fund all of those universities and all of their needs when there ought to be some consolidation. And how that looks needs to be left to the educators, not the politicians, the best way to do that. And that's been one of the difficult challenges. But, you know, we're in a special session right now, which will end the end of this month. And I suspect we will be back in another special session later this year to deal with the shortcomings in the budget after we see if there is another stimulus package and how that falls out. But I do believe that a large portion of any funds the state gets that we can direct will have to go to the universities, because obviously if we don't have LSU football this year, that's going to be a real problem up here in Baton Rouge, because those numbers bring in incredible money to those universities, as do many of the programs and many of the gifts that are given to the universities because of hard economic times will suffer. I know we're working on some seafood initiatives with the universities that relied on a lot of outside investment that has pretty much dried up. And we're struggling to get funding for those initiatives, where we've put up money to several of the universities to study the effects of the long term of the oil spill on the coastal seafood industry for Louisiana. And where that money was flowing freely to the universities, it's kind of hit a wall because of the economic situation. So it's kind of a multiple of things that are going to affect the funding to the university, including the state budget, that we're going to have to keep on the forefront to make sure we keep them moving in the right direction.
Great. Thank you for that. That's very helpful. So Governor Long, I want to ask one more question about safety that we got in Q&A, and especially thinking about our educators and our school staff, and as they have to return to schools, and especially those who may be a little more vulnerable based on age or health to the pandemic. what are some of the things that schools and districts maybe should be thinking about to help make sure that return to school is safe, also for the teachers and the other essential staff there?
That's an excellent question. And in Delaware, if your state hasn't done this, in your divisions of public health, I would encourage you to get a dashboard to get information created and translate that over to your departments of ed. I know in Delaware, de.gov/coronavirus, you can pull up, you can see what's actively occurring, what cases there are, and in Delaware also at doe.k12.de.us/COVID-19. I sound like a commercial now. You can visit our website. We are doing what you're hearing at the recommendations, both of the scientists from the CDC, blending with the best in academic curriculum and pedagogy, right? We've got to come together with curricula as well as common sense. And we want to make sure each school's got different resources. Some places are fancy, right? You walk in, they can do a thermal temperature. Not everybody's going to be able to afford to do that. That might be private schools or wherever. But we really have to have working groups that dialogue like we have here in Delaware. We have 3 groups of experts involving the community, involving parents, who are really laying out the plans. What's happening if we have no COVID? What if it's minimal, moderate, high? Common sense things, making sure that temperatures are checked. People don't report to work ill. Making sure that you're staying on top of person's mental health and well-being as well, paying really close attention. Teachers are sometimes the first to notice that teenager who's having suicidal thoughts, okay? It carries the whole gamut. And not taking things for granted, really basing the data on science and using those measures. The challenges are gonna be the logistics. So those in Delaware on the operations side, also with health, you know, what do you do with kids? Do you stagger days? Do you put them on a school bus? You can't put them all on a school bus. What days, what evening, hours, what's logistics? So I think using common sense health measures, balance, like Billy said, where the economy continues. I had the opportunity in Delaware to lead the virtual tours, town halls around health and economy. You gotta be healthy first to have a healthy economy. But we also wanna avoid the major shutdowns. I know Billy's going to be run out of Baton Rouge if LSU isn't out there on the field, but it really is about common sense with athletics. And that is a piece we have not mentioned today in schools. How are you working with your athletic directors, your nurses, your counselors? They're all really important pieces as well, because we can do everything right in the classroom. We can't control them when they leave and go home. And we don't always see everything in the locker room or on the fields. So where we can control and give examples and role model to these children, that's going to be really important. So
unfortunately, it looks like we had a little connection issue there. We will.
It'll be interesting.
There we go. Governor, how long are you back with us? There we go.
I am back. Go ahead. You keep going. I think it's my time. I must freeze out when they tell me it's time to roll. I apologize for that. This is talk about connectivity and broadband issues in the state buildings. Look at that. Sorry about that.
No need to apologize. We are coming up on time anyway. And I did want to ask you both one final question. And Governor Nungesser, you mentioned that many Louisianans can't really see the light at the end of the tunnel right now. And I know that's true for a lot of Americans. Wondering if we could maybe go or try to end on a more hopeful note. And what is it right now that's giving you a sense of hope as we move forward and come out of this?
Well, you know, Louisianans always, after Katrina, you didn't see any hope for Louisiana. And seeing Louisianans reach out and extend a hand, a helpful hand to their neighbors. We're seeing that across Louisiana. Families taking in families when their loved ones are in the hospital with this disease, with this virus. Incredible acts of kindness across the state. And that gives you new hope in everybody caring about someone else. And we see that across Louisiana. I'm sure you see it in your state as well. That makes you know we'll get through this. And there'll be some incredible adjustments and emotional problems with the kids and their parents through this. But those people that are strong, that are reaching out, helping their neighbors, helping their kids and talking through it, I know we'll get through it. And every day you run across one of those stories where someone just took someone's kids and went and brought them to get something to eat, and got them out the house. Those incredible stories continue. And I think that's the positive thing that makes me feel confident we'll get through this, and we'll look back at it and learn some valuable lessons, but we'll be better off afterwards.
Thank you so much. Governor, how long?
Yes, building on that, there is a lot of hope. From this, we have learned a lot about how we need to improve our technology, and we're doing it. We've learned a lot about why we need telehealth for mental health and counseling, and we're doing it. Also, for the first time in a long time in some states, and I know this being chair-elect of NLGA, I'm not saying it here in Delaware, but I know for the first time you're actually having some superintendents and state teachers unions and organizations coming together and all agreeing, because it's about teacher safety. One thing I failed to mention that was in your chat line on public safety is if you have a senior staff member and elder faculty, you know, you're going to be looking at testing and contact tracing. I don't know how I failed to mention that earlier. I think I preach it and say it every day, every hour. I forgot to mention that. You know, you're going to have to make sure testing is in place, that contact tracing is available to staff and faculty as well. But I am optimistic because I have found that, you know, through the darkest times come the brightest lights. And I know my great-grandmother lived through the Spanish flu in Philadelphia. She was 16 and a teenager, and she talked about how that changed the decade, the generation that followed. So I'm optimistic. These young adults who didn't get to go to prom, who didn't have graduation this year, they're going to turn out to be resilient if we are there to support them. And so I think to the Hunt Institute, to my good friend Billy, who is Mr. Chair Buddy, I don't know, he gets through every disaster somehow more energized and more helpful to people. And that's what I think it's about. And I think teachers, absolutely, educators, or those who are support staff in the education side, don't get into this to do it for their pocketbook. You know what they do it for? Their hope and their heart. So heart and hope go hand in hand. And so thank you for letting us have a moment today. And I appreciate the questions in the chat. They've given me some thoughts, things that we need to address here in Delaware.
Well, thank you both so much. This was a very rich discussion, and we appreciate your insights and for you taking the time out of your day, because I know you both have a lot you could be doing right now. Sorry, we're very sorry for not being able to get to every question. We will try to follow up on some of those. We'll have a recap blog as well as a video of this, so look out for that. We'll try to answer a couple more of those questions. We have a great discussion coming up on Thursday. We're staying in Louisiana with Kim Hunter-Reed and Mike Krause from Tennessee, the State Higher Education Executive Officers, as well as Kim Cook from the National College Attainment Network. So we encourage you to join us for that conversation on Thursday at 2 p.m. And after that, we'll have more webinars coming up along with our state leaders across the spectrum later in July, but we will have a short break due to the July 4th holiday. So once again, thank you so much to both of these Lieutenant Governors for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you. Come see us in Louisiana.
Thank you. Yeah, come to Delaware.
On the way. Thanks again.